Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. I'm an audiologist and strength coach, and I specialize in vestibular disorders. Welcome to my channel, The Steady Coach, where we talk about all things related to vertigo, dizziness, balance problems, health, and wellness. Today I want to give you some ideas for what you should do first after you are diagnosed with PPPD, MDDS, or other forms of chronic dizziness. Again, these recommendations are assuming that you have already ruled out medical causes or tissue damage that are leading to the symptoms that you currently have. The very first thing you should do if you've been diagnosed with PPPD, MDDS, chronic dizziness, CSD, is educate yourself with the right sources. If you Google chronic dizziness, PPPD, or any of the other conditions that I just mentioned, you're going to likely pull up some large mainstream medical sources of information like WebMD, or sources that are medical and specialize in vestibular disorders like the Vestibular Disorders Association, which, as you know, I volunteer for. And these are great resources for people whose symptoms are stemming from tissue damage or a medical problem. However, unfortunately, these more mainstream sources treat chronic dizziness issues like MDDS and PPPD like mysterious ailments with no standardized treatment protocols and no known cause, while they do acknowledge that these symptoms are stemming from complex biopsychosocial factors, which is something, of course, we've talked about here. That's really as far as they go. And when you read that, it's very easy to think that there's something horribly wrong with you. Okay, so there's no tissue damage. These really well-respected mainstream sources are saying there's really no standardized treatment protocol. What I hear when I see something like that is, I can't be helped. No one knows what's wrong with me. All I know is that there's something awful going on in my body and it can't be fixed. This is simply not true. Yes, chronic dizziness is a complex biopsychosocial ailment. And yes, it's true that mainstream medical treatments of these conditions don't usually yield good results. It's just that mainstream medical practice has not really caught up with the latest thinking about disorders that are biopsychosocial. Because on the surface, things like chronic dizziness, IBS, chronic pain, fibromyalgia have completely different sets of symptoms, it's easy to assume that they're completely different disorders. And this type of thinking makes complete sense if you are medically trained and you're used to looking for a tissue damage cause to someone's symptoms. I mean, that's what medicine is all about. That's how I was trained as an audiologist. Someone has a symptom and therefore you're looking for the tissue damage or medical problem that is causing the symptom. That is the assumption in mainstream medicine. But when symptoms are inconsistent, and you can see my latest video on more information about what makes disorders like this inconsistent, I'll link to it above and below, you end up finding that these disorders with completely different presentations or completely different symptoms end up actually having a lot in common. And what they have in common, by the way, is stress, and we're going to talk about that more in a moment. But because mainstream medical practice has this biomedical bias, aka this tendency just to look at the biological causes and treat the biological causes of someone's symptoms, mainstream medical information is often not going to give you actionable steps toward getting better. In other words, if you don't have tissue damage that's leading to your symptoms, mainstream medical advice at the moment doesn't usually have a lot to offer you. So I want to recommend some books that I think are really great resources for someone dealing with something like chronic dizziness. And as I've said previously, many of the resources that exist have been written for people who are in pain, because that is a problem that gets a lot of airtime in our current culture. But dizziness and chronic pain stem from the same processes in the brain. So some of the books I'm going to list below are The Way Out by Alon and Alon. They Can't Find Anything Wrong by Dr. David Clarke, and The Mindbody Prescription by Dr. John Sarno. I'll also link to some other online resources and lectures below. And this leads me to the second thing that you should do once you've been diagnosed with chronic dizziness, which is to tune into your body to see if you can find the source of the distress that is making your body talk to you. In other words, there is some source of stress within you that is serving as the fuel line for your dizziness. And if you're going to truly get better, we have to cut this fuel line. Dizziness is your body's way of saying stop. So what is your body trying to stop you from? Why is it stopping you? And stress can be divided into a few categories, but to make this very, very broad, you can think of it in two disparate or separate categories. One being external stress, which is kind of the obvious things that we think of when we think of stress. You have an exam coming up. You had a fight with a friend or with your spouse. You're stuck in really heavy traffic. And then there's internal stress, and that can stem from personality traits like being perfectionistic and putting a lot of pressure on yourself. Or it can come from unresolved emotions from past stressful experiences or relationships, like with a parent, partner, or a friend. Or maybe you were in a situation at some point in your life, perhaps you were a first responder, in which you really just had to push through significant stress and trauma, and that stress and trauma has not yet been revisited and processed. So in this second step, I want you to really think about these things. In fact, make a list, write them all down. Write down all the potential sources of stress that are external in my life right now, or internal, significant life events, traumas, bad experiences that maybe you have not fully processed and come to terms with. Pay extra close attention to the ones that make your symptoms flare up when you even just think about them. This provides you further evidence that, again, what you're dealing with is neural circuit dizziness, but it also serves as a kind of trailhead for the things that you're going to need to focus on in order to get better. Sometimes just writing these things down helps you get a clearer view of how you might start addressing them. And I'd suggest spending some time journaling about each of these significant life events or stressors. Write down how you feel, uncensored, and notice what happens. Sometimes this is enough to spontaneously make your symptoms go away. If you want a structured way of doing this, I'm going to link below to Dr. Howard Schubiner's book, Unlearn Your Pain, which again is pain-focused, but it has a really nice structured workbook contained inside that will help you work through some of these significant life events. And a note here, of course, sometimes people really do need a coach or a mental health provider in order to work through these residual feelings or unresolved stress. But the most important thing to understand here is that stress is the fuel for your symptoms, and if you're going to get better, you are going to need to address it. And finally, once you've done those two things, I have a few things I'd recommend that you not do. I'd like you to think twice about joining an online support group. I know you need support, and the loneliness and alienation from people around you is one of the hardest parts of having any kind of chronic condition. So I'm not telling you not to seek support, but online support groups are often a spectacular bonfire of anxiety, catastrophizing, and people with severe psychological distress who are not getting better. And that's because the people who get better leave the groups or don't join the groups in the first place. There's a very strong negativity bias in these online support groups. Now, if you have found one that's supportive and doesn't make you feel worse, fantastic. But if you are a member of one or you've thought about joining one, think about what you need in order to recover and feel better. And that's what you really should be focusing on, not what other people's experiences have been. The other thing I wanted to advise you to do is don't stop moving. Fear and stress are at the heart of your symptoms. By developing avoidance behaviors in which you are terrified to do things and you develop more and more phobias about what you can and can't do, you are directly feeding the symptoms. Now, I know this is a really hard balance to find. On one hand, you want to avoid feeding the fear by avoiding activities. And on the other hand, you don't want to stress yourself out and make yourself more fearful by doing activities that bring on a ton of symptoms. So you want to try to find yourself somewhere in between. You're going to have to experience some symptoms to get better. You're going to have to push through some symptoms to get better, and that is okay. And some of my clients are so distressed that they are dizzy all the time. So if you're dizzy and at a 10 all the time, that is not unheard of. But you can still find tiny ways of pushing through some of your symptoms and then backing off to ground yourself, breathe, meditate, or do whatever else you can do to relax. And for those of you whose symptoms are on and off, you might find you have good days and bad days, for example. Finding a good way of pacing yourself is excellent advice. And by that, what I mean is when you have a great day, You may not want to push yourself to do something so extraordinary that you have a rebound of symptoms the next day because you're tired and unused to the activity. Because by the way, that happens to people without dizziness or chronic pain. For example, when I take my family to Disney World and I take 15,000 steps when I'm used to taking 7 or 8,000, my legs hurt the next day. So it's normal to have a rebound of a little bit of fatigue after pushing yourself. And maybe for you, you're a little bit extra sensitive to those rebounds, so you may not want to put yourself in the position where you're going to have a major rebound, even though it's normal and safe when that happens. So pacing involves choosing activities that are actionable every day, on your worst days and on your best days, and just pushing yourself every day according to your ability. That can help keep you moving. And this is where vestibular rehabilitation therapy can be so helpful, because it's a structured way of progressing through exercises as you start to feel better with them. The most important thing though is to just keep moving and try to do as many of the things that you enjoy doing as possible while working on the first 2 things that we talked about in this video. I hope this was a helpful one for you guys. This is a question I'm asked very frequently. What should I do now that I know what I have? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to ask any questions there as well. Thank you guys so much for tuning in as always, and if you found this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe. I will talk to you guys soon. Take care.